Roman army in a regular battle upon an open field, he had not strength sufficient to reduce citadels or attack fortified camps. His stock of provisions had become, therefore, more and more nearly exhausted, until now he had a supply for only 10 days, and he saw no possible mode of increasing it. His great object was, therefore, to bring on a battle. Varro was ready and willing to give him battle, but Aemilius, or to call him by his name in full, Paulus Aemilius, which is the appellation by which he is more frequently known, was very desirous to persevere in the Fabian policy till the 10 days had expired, after which he knew that Hannibal must be reduced to extreme distress, and might have to surrender at once to save his army from actual famine. In fact, it was said that the troops were on such short allowance as to produce great discontent, and that a large body of Spaniards were preparing to desert and go over together to the Roman camp. Things were in this state when, one day, Hannibal sent out a party from his camp to procure food, and Aemilius, who happened to hold the command that day, sent out a strong force to intercept them. He was successful. The Carthaginian detachment was routed. Nearly 2,000 men were killed, and the rest fled, by any roads they could find, back to Hannibal's camp. Varro was very eager to follow them there, but Aemilius ordered his men to halt. He was afraid of some trick or treachery on the part of Hannibal, and was disposed to be satisfied with the victory he had already won. This little success, however, only inflamed Varro's ardor for a battle, and produced a general enthusiasm in the Roman army, and, a day or two afterward, a circumstance occurred which raised this excitement to the highest pitch. Some reconnoiterers, who had been stationed within sight of Hannibal's camp to watch the motions and indications there, sent in word to the consuls that the Carthaginian guards around the encampment had all suddenly disappeared, and that a very extraordinary and unusual silence reigned within. Parties of the Roman soldiers went up gradually and cautiously to the Carthaginian lines, and soon found that the camp was deserted, though the fires were still burning and the tents remained. This intelligence, of course, put the whole Roman army into a fever of excitement and agitation. They crowded around the consuls' pavilions, and clamorously insisted on being led to take possession of the camp and to pursue the enemy. "He has fled," they said, "and with such precipitation that he has left the tents standing and his fires still burning. Lead us on in pursuit of him." Varro was as much excited as the rest. He was eager for action. Aemilius hesitated. He made particular inquiries. He said they ought to proceed with caution. Finally, he called up a certain prudent and sagacious officer, named Statilius, and ordered him to take a small body of horsemen, ride over to the Carthaginian camp, ascertain the facts exactly, and report the result. Statilius did so. When he reached the lines, he ordered his troops to halt, and took with him 2 horsemen on whose courage and strength he could rely, and rode in. The 3 horsemen rode around the camp and examined everything with a view of ascertaining whether Hannibal had really abandoned his position and fled, or whether some stratagem was intended. When he came back, he reported to the army that, in his opinion, the desertion of the camp was not real, but a trick to draw the Romans into some difficulty. The fires were the largest on the side toward the Romans, which indicated that they were built to deceive. He saw money, too, and other valuables strewed about upon the ground, which appeared to him much more like a bait set in a trap than like property abandoned by fugitives as encumbrances to flight. Varro was not convinced, and the army, hearing of the money, were excited to a greater eagerness for plunder. They could hardly be restrained. Just then, however, 2 slaves that had been taken prisoners by the Carthaginians some time before came into the Roman camp. They told the consuls that the whole Carthaginian force was hid in ambush very near, waiting for the Romans to enter their encampment, when they were going to surround them and cut them to pieces. In the bustle and movement attendant on this plan, the slaves had escaped. Of course, the Roman army were now satisfied. They returned, chagrined and disappointed, to their own quarters, and Hannibal, still more chagrined and disappointed, returned to his. He soon found, however, that he could not remain any longer where he was. His provisions were exhausted, and he could obtain no more. The Romans would not come out of their encampment to give him battle on equal terms, and they were too strongly entrenched to be attacked where they were. He determined, therefore, to evacuate that part of the country, and move by a sudden march into Apulia. Apulia was on the eastern side of Italy. The river Aufidus runs through it, having a town named Cannae near its mouth. The region of the Aufidus was a warm and sunny valley, which was now waving with ripening grain. Being further south than the place where he had been, and more exposed to the influence of the sun, Hannibal thought that the crops would be sooner ripe, and that, at least, he should have a new field to plunder. He accordingly decided now to leave his camp in earnest, and move into Apulia. He made the same arrangements as before, when his departure was a mere pretense. He left tents pitched and fires burning, but marched his army off the ground by night and secretly, so that the Romans did not perceive his departure. And the next day, when they saw the appearances of silence and solitude about the camp, they suspected another deception, and made no move themselves. At length, however, intelligence came that the long columns of Hannibal's army had been seen already far to the eastward, and moving on as fast as possible, with all their baggage. The Romans, after much debate and uncertainty, resolved to follow. The eagles of the Apennines looked down upon the two great moving masses, creeping slowly through the forests and valleys, like swarms of insects, one following the other, led on by a strange but strong attraction, drawing them toward each other when at a distance, but kept asunder by a still stronger repulsion when near. The Roman army came up with that of Hannibal on the river Aufidus, near Cannae, and the two vast encampments were formed with all the noise and excitement attendant on the movements of the two great armies posting themselves on the eve of a battle, in the neighborhood of each other. In the Roman camp, the confusion was greatly aggravated by the angry disputes which immediately arose between the consuls and their respective adherents as to the course to be pursued. Varro insisted on giving the Carthaginians immediate battle. Aemilius refused. Varro said that he must protest against continuing any longer these inexcusable delays, and insist upon a battle. He could not consent to be responsible any further for allowing Italy to lie at the mercy of such a scourge. Aemilius replied that if Varro did precipitate a battle, he himself protested against his rashness, and could not be, in any degree, responsible for the result. The various officers took sides, some with one consul and some with the other, but most with Varro. The dissension filled the camp with excitement, agitation, and ill will. In the meantime, the inhabitants of the country, into which these two vast hordes of ferocious, though restrained and organized combatants had made such a sudden interruption, were flying as fast as they could from the awful scene which they expected was to ensue. They carried from their villages and cabins what little property could be saved, and took the women and children away to retreats and fastnesses, wherever they imagined they could find temporary concealment or protection. The news of the movement of the two armies spread throughout the country, carried by hundreds of refugees and messengers, and all Italy, looking on with suspense and anxiety, awaited the result. The armies maneuvered for a day or two, Varro, during his term of command, making arrangements to promote and favor an action, and Aemilius, on the following day, doing everything in his power to prevent it. In the end, Varro succeeded. The lines were formed and the battle must be begun. Aemilius gave up the contest now, and while he protested earnestly against the course which Varro pursued, he prepared to do all in his power to prevent a defeat, since there was no longer a possibility of avoiding a collision. The battle began, and the reader must imagine the scene, since no pen can describe it. 50,000 men on one side and 80,000 on the other, at work hard and steadily for 6 hours, killing each other by every possible means of destruction. Stabs, blows, struggles, outcries, shouts of anger and defiance, and screams of terror and agony, all mingled together in one general din, which covered the whole country for an extent of many miles, altogether constituted a scene of horror, of which none but those who have witnessed great battles can form any adequate idea. It seems as if Hannibal could do nothing without stratagem. In the early part of this conflict he sent a large body of his troops over to the Romans as deserters. They threw down their spears and bucklers as they reached the Roman lines in token of surrender. The Romans received them, opened a passage for them through into the rear, and ordered them to remain there. As they were